Hi everyone, welcome to Changing Tides with the Incubation Network. Every year, about 8 million tonnes of plastic is dumped into our oceans. That's 22,000 tonnes every day. And since we all need oceans to live, this is a problem that affects me, you, and really everybody here on Earth.
So on our show, we dig deeper into the problem of plastic waste, how it affects public and environmental health, and talk to people about what's currently being done to help strengthen circular economies and reduce the amount of waste around us.
Hi everyone, welcome to our new podcast. My name is Laura Benz and I'm the Program Director at the Incubation Network. We've got a 5-part podcast series for you, exploring how people are trying to solve Southeast Asia's plastic problem. This is our first episode and we are thrilled to have Umesh Madhavan, he is the Research Director at the Circulate Initiative, with us as our first guest.
And I'm Titus Lowe, the Program Manager for Circularity at the Incubation Network. The Circulate Initiative is a partner of the Incubation Network and is a non-profit organization that works with entrepreneurs and stakeholders to create more circular, inclusive, and commercially viable waste management and recycling systems in emerging markets.
So the Circulate Initiative, or we call it TCI for short, does a whole lot of research. They develop insights, develop tools, really to help us better understand the plastic waste issue. It puts them in a really, really good position to understand where the biggest problems are across the value chain or the supply chain and the best way that we can combat those.
And that's why we're so glad to have Umesh here with us today. Umesh has been working in research for over 17 years and has supported multinationals, government agencies, and other organizations in both emerging and developed markets. Today, Umesh is TCI's Research Director, where he plans TCI's research strategy and manages research projects across various themes on circularity. So stay with us as we have a chat with Umesh today.
Umesh, thank you so much for joining us on the Changing Tides podcast. So I think the best place to start is with a bird's eye view of this issue, right? Plastic litter currently makes up around 80% of the total marine debris in the ocean. The majority of that is actually from river plastic leakage in Asia. You're going to tell us more about that shortly, but we know the scale of the problem is expected to grow as urbanization and the rising middle class is also growing within the region. I'm overwhelmed. It seems overwhelming. How is TCI approaching this and what role do you play in this big picture?
Hi, Laura. Hi, Titus. It's a pleasure to be here and I'm super excited about our discussion today. Indeed, it seems like a huge problem, but it's not one without solutions and one which can be tackled through collective action. There are an estimated 150 million tons of plastic in the ocean. Just to put that number into context, that's like a truckload of plastic going and dumping plastic into the ocean every minute. So that's the scale of the problem. Based on available statistics, that's a number which keeps growing by 11 million tons every year. Most of it is leaking from South and Southeast Asia, as you've previously identified about Asia's contribution to the problem. Without drastic action to change that linear system of use, which we are all trying to tackle, the flow of plastic waste into the rivers, oceans, and other natural ecosystems is expected to triple by 2040. So at the Circulate Initiative, we collaborate with key stakeholders across South and Southeast Asia's waste management and recycling sector, incubating solutions and generating insights to support and accelerate that investment into tackling ocean plastic pollution and advancing a circular economy in emerging markets. So working in close collaboration with a community of innovators, investors, partners, and programs, we pursue two main strategies. Firstly, through incubation and our wonderful partners such as Laura and Titus yourself at the Incubation Network, we support entrepreneurs, innovators, city planners to source, enable, and scale solutions that tackle the ocean plastic problem. So the idea is that to increase the number and quality of promising ventures in South and Southeast Asia. Secondly, through insights, through our expertise and network of strategic partners, we develop insights and tools that help identify gaps to addressing the plastic pollution problem. Having identified these gaps, what are the priority strategies and interventions that are required? We identify them. And once you know the problem, once you understand the solutions, it's obviously critical to measure and amplify solutions. As research director at the Circulate Initiative, I set the insight strategy and plan and execute and amplify our research across diverse themes. I mean, for example, it's useless if we produce a bunch load of PDF reports and if no one reads it and no one knows how to act on it. So we make sure that whatever research and tools we provide reach out to the right audience, and they make use of it. On my end, I am passionate about data and insights, having been in this space for more than almost 2 decades now. So that robust data, because we know that robust data is essential to ensuring that we focus our efforts on solutions that will have the greatest impact. So that's what we do at the Circulate Initiative, and that's where my role and effort lies.
Thanks so much, Umesh. I mean, when you started, you shared a lot of sobering figures. I'm just wondering, like, through your work now, is there any good news about the plastic waste issue in the Southeast Asian region at the moment?
Absolutely. I think if you're not optimists, I don't think we should be working in this space to begin with.
Yeah,
Right?
pretty much.
The good news is that the plastic pollution problem in the region and globally is a solvable one. I mean, it's just that we cannot delay action. So just sharing some more numbers once again, if we go back to the recent report, slightly dated now, but once published by the Pew Charitable Trust and Systemic, there are 2 advantages of adopting a systems approach to solving the challenge. Firstly, an 80% reduction of ocean plastic leakage is possible by 2040. And it doesn't need anything new. I mean, you can just use existing technologies, but you need to make sure that action happens both at the upstream and the downstream part of the value chain. And you need systems action. And obviously, when it comes to tackling any sort of problem at this scale, you'd start talking about cost. What's the cost of intervention? The public sector cost of managing plastic waste in a system change scenario is in fact cheaper than managing a high leakage system as it continues under a business as usual scenario. So we are looking at somewhere between 2021 and 2040 needing public investments of around 600 billion if it's a systems change scenario, as opposed to $670 billion if it is a high leakage system under a business as usual scenario. So bottom line is we have a problem, and we know that there is a problem which needs to be resolved sooner and very soon and very quickly before we all start drowning under an ocean of plastic waste. The cost, there is an investment which needs to be made, and the public sector cost, and in fact even the private sector cost of an intervention based on current technologies is cheaper than if we continue the system to propagate and we don't tackle it the soonest.
Right. Thanks for sharing. And so, do you think it's an issue about political will? From your experience working with government agencies, what have you observed so far in terms of mitigation plans at a national and policy-making level to address this issue?
See, I mean, governments have been making progress on the climate change and plastic pollution crisis. I mean, most people don't see plastic pollution as a climate problem, but the reality of it is that these are interconnected essentially.
Yep.
So the most notable multi-stakeholder action which we have seen, and especially involving governments, is the adoption of the global resolution to end plastic pollution
Yep.
at the United Nations Environment Assembly earlier this year. So we are all hopeful, and we are all working towards forging an internationally legally binding agreement by 2024 to make sure that we address the full life cycle of plastic. So this is important because we are looking at the entire plastics value chain all the way from production to design and to disposal, right? And also we are looking at a policy which we hope, or a treaty which we hope will be inclusive in its nature, keeping in mind the varying level of development of different economies around the world, keeping in mind also the fact that when it comes to plastic waste management, some of this is handled by informal waste workers who are often the most marginalized sections of the society. So that's on a more global level. When it comes to our part of the world in South and Southeast Asia, ASEAN has launched the ASEAN Regional Action Plan for combating marine debris, and the ASEAN member states for between 2021 and 2025. And under this plan, there are actions for countries to phase out single-use plastics. We've already seen that happening in some emerging markets. So India has just banned the use of single-use plastics, and that's an encouraging sign. In Southeast Asia, there's also ideas to harmonize regional policies on recycling, on plastic packaging standards, and to also strengthen measurement and monitoring of marine debris. So as a collective, as a collective, we are moving towards taking positive steps. Governments are taking positive steps to solve the plastic pollution problem. But the responsibility should not lie purely on governments. I think this is where I touched upon the systems change that is needed, because we need all actors to be involved in what's a multi-stakeholder action for a multifaceted problem, right? So we have governments, we need investors, we need businesses, we need consumers. All of us have that role to play to make sure that we're coming to putting together a sustainable system solution.
Yeah,
Umesh, you've set me up perfectly. Two things on my mind about these different types of stakeholders. I was actually going to ask you to dig in a little bit more deeply on what can people do? What can consumers do? Joe Blogs, me, you out there every day. First half of the question. And then businesses. I really like that you touched on this kind of business angle, businesses linked to the economy. So what can Joe Blogs do? And what can business do? What can organizations and businesses do to help make an effective change?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of discussion around who the primary actor should be. But I think it's a shared problem, and I think it requires shared action as well. So the best way to look at it is if you look at the waste management hierarchy, any action that an individual or a business can take starts from refusing plastic altogether to latter stage recycling initiatives. So the most effective intervention, when you think of it, are those which do not generate plastic waste in the first place. So, for example, if you're refusing plastic when one does not need it, especially when it comes to avoidable single-use plastic products. So that's the literally the low-hanging fruit. You don't need it, don't use it, expressly refuse it. At the latter stages, once plastic has already become waste, then it is key that more of the material is recycled. It's interesting that despite so many years of effort, there is a growing recognition to move the plastic economy to a more recycled one. But at the same time, we are looking at numbers of our recycling rate around 9%. Right? So the most recent OECD report stated a 9% recycling rate. And this has meant that there is a pervasive supply shortage of recyclables. So there remains a value action gap on the consumer side, especially, or a green gap, where changes in consumer attitudes have not translated into action. So you get some people responding to surveys and say, hey, we are all green and we'll do this and we'll do that. But the reality is that when it comes to making that change, especially speaking with their wallets, it doesn't necessarily translate. So we need to make sure that with recycled material in short supply, we establish long-lasting recycling habits throughout the world, and we shift that dial towards plastic circularity and tackling pollution. So there's an interesting report we recently released around the consumer behavior. So in partnership with Delterra, an environmental nonprofit organization, we realized that a combination of infrastructure and engagement initiatives dealing with consumers can address common barriers to recycling behavior. So, for example, on a consumer side, if we are very careful about segregating plastic on a household level, and if you see that the municipality vehicle comes in and they've segregated it all nicely and then they dump it all into the common bin, for a consumer, there's nothing which defeats that purpose. They'll be like, why am I spending all that energy and effort in doing something like that? I mean, the other side of the story is that even for policymakers to consider is that the results of our research reveal some interesting insights. The fact that behavior change actually costs significantly less than technology-based alternatives for boosting recycling outcomes. And that payback happen can as little as 2 to 4 years. So that's on the consumer side of things. Now, Laura, going back to your question around businesses, I mean, I think businesses have a more important role to play. I don't think they should pass the buck. I think it's a shared responsibility, like I mentioned earlier. They should take responsibility for products' end-of-life impacts, from the design and the choice of materials through to collection, sorting, recycling, and disposal. In some markets, it's already becoming mandatory because of extended producer responsibility regulations. In other markets, I think there's a proactive need to take efforts to do that. So if you've seen, a lot of corporations are making targets or setting up targets around recycled content. But eventually, if you don't have that feedstock supply, you're stuck with a situation where you have mandates and you have targets to meet, but you eventually just don't have the supply of material. So that's the business side of things that we need to start looking at as well.
It sounds like the age-old, what was it, a jingle that we all likely grew up with we used to be reduce, reuse, and recycle. I think refuse, reduce, reuse, and recycle is still strong,
Absolutely.
right? It's still standing true, and different people are playing different roles at different parts. Really, really interesting to think. I always think of that jingle in my mind, and it sounds like it's today still truer than ever, more important than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely still is applicable.
Yeah, and when I was growing up, it was just the 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I think we have come to 6, 7, 9 hours now. right? So there's a lot more thinking around it now. Absolutely.
Give me the 9. I don't know the 9. Titus, do you know the 9?
I might know
I
6,
think
but not 9.
I think it's 6 or 7 or 9. I can't remember the most one. So you all start all the way from rethink or refuse to rethink to reduce to recycle.
Yeah.
So essentially, think of understanding the waste management hierarchy as one where you're looking at solutions before even plastics produce or any waste is produced, and this can apply across the waste management types, right? To making sure that you tackle more of it before it becomes waste, to rather than having end of life solutions where this becomes waste and you're trying to deal with the waste problem. So that's that whole waste management hierarchy, and you can think of it as an inverted pyramid where most of that intervention actually happens or tries to happen at the top of the pyramid rather than bottom when you're trying to funnel that down.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because just looking at how much resources and actually how much effort it takes to actually recycle just a single bottle, I'm thinking we have to stop producing it in the first place. So yeah, just coming back to that point, Umesh, and I know you've shared a little bit about what you've already done, but what other types of projects are TCI currently running to contribute towards this issue? And are there any solutions in particular that have shown promise?
Right. Yeah. So our work is centered around two primary strategies: insights and incubation, like I mentioned earlier. I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with the activities of the Incubation Network. So let me focus on the insights side. Our role is to focus on existing data and knowledge gaps on the plastic pollution problem and identifying solutions, as I mentioned earlier. So the idea is that we democratize that information availability to all stakeholders. I mean, for somebody who's looking at insights into, say, gender-related issues in relation to the plastic pollution problem, is there a place where they can go and find that information? We want to make sure that people are equipped with that information. So, among the whole range of work that we've undertaken, let me just share two quick examples. So towards the end of last year, we launched the Plastic Life Cycle Assessment Calculator for the Environment and Society, places for short. So it's a tool, it's a GHG calculator, greenhouse gas emissions calculator tool, which offers the ability to assess the climate impact of current waste management practices in Asia, specifically for Indonesia and India. So this includes understanding if plastic is moved away from, say, open burning or from open dumping towards recycling. Is there really any environmental impact? Because oftentimes investors are faced with a situation where really don't know what the environmental impact is, or it's even for governments when they're in discussion with key stakeholders about putting a recycling facility, for example, people come back and say, "Yeah, we understand there might be an environmental benefit. Can you justify it? Do you have numbers to back you up?" So just to answer those questions, that the Places tool has been set up. So with the Places calculator tool, which is available free of cost to anybody who wishes to use it on our website, investors, entrepreneurs, policymakers have the opportunity to access reliable market-specific environmental data, whether it be in relation to emissions, energy savings, water savings, of diverting plastic away from their current end of life, such as open dumping and so on, like I mentioned, and towards recycling. So that's one tool, and I think it's a critical one which we are expanding to cover more markets beyond India and Indonesia to include more countries in South and Southeast Asia, which is because, like I said, the plastic problem is also a climate problem, and most people don't realize it because how plastics interacts with the environment, especially when it goes into end of life, is not something people have really thought about. So that's one example of one of the initiatives that we are undertaking. Another one is around bridging the investment gap. Now, especially when it comes to waste, most people don't see value in it. So there's always this discussion around, is it really worthwhile investing? I mean, I'll give you an anecdote of an investor discussion I sat in last year, where head of, I think, was a $500 billion in assets, an investment company which had over $500 billion, coming out and say, "Oh, I didn't know that this was a space which was investable and there were opportunities for investment." Right. So we're trying to bridge that gap. We're trying to bring more private capital, making sure that people understand the space. So we worked with World Economic Forum's Global Plastic Action Partnership earlier this year to develop an investor toolkit which demonstrates how private capital specifically can unlock opportunities in the plastic circular economy. So there are various streams of work that we undertake. So two examples I've given here: one relate to climate, one relate to investment and diverting and accelerating investment in this space. But our idea is that we touch across each of those points across the whole value chain to make sure that people have better quality information for decision making. Now, Titus, going back to your second part of the problem, what solutions have I been most impressed with? I think it would be remiss of me to just pick one and say, hey, this one is great, the others were not so much. But as I was reflecting on this, I think what really encourages me is that more than specific solutions, there is a collective enthusiasm in this space. And I think the work that you guys at the Incubation Network are doing is actually particularly compelling. And I also draw an example of a recent evaluation committee for an innovation challenge at which I was one of the evaluation committee members. And we had more than 200 solutions from which we had to select 10, right? So it was not just about the number of submissions which came through for that particular innovation challenge, but also the length and breadth of solutions which people were thinking about, right? So there were solutions which range from tackling waste management or providing waste management solutions, tackling microplastics, providing material alternatives, whether it be bio-based or otherwise, to plastics, to more broader data and technology-linked ideas which provide better and more precise data for monitoring and impact assessment. So as you will notice, there's a whole range of solutions which happen across the whole value chain. And I can imagine this is only one of those examples. And I'm sure that having run innovation challenges on your own as well, you've seen that length and breadth of solutions which come through accelerating. There's more and more people working on it. So I'm truly excited by where we are and how I see that there is genuine interest and initiative from all actors to tackle the problem. Truly exciting times ahead. And like I said, I'm optimistic that we and the different actors can come together to tackle the plastic pollution crisis.
Definitely need more optimism and optimistic people like you, Sumesh. So thanks so much for sharing.
Agree. I am also one of those optimistic people. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but just wanted to say thank you so much again, Umesh. Obviously, you're a really, really valuable partner of us at the Incubation Network. We couldn't do half of what we do without you. So I look forward to hopefully some more positive outcomes together in the future. And thanks again for your time today.
It's been an absolute pleasure coming on this channel and sharing my thoughts. Thanks, Laura and Titus, for having me here.
Thanks so much, Umesh. Yeah, always a
Take
pleasure.
care. So Titus, so good to hear from Umesh at TCI. I think what I really appreciated was the kind of tangible nature of the things that he was sharing. The places calculator is one thing that always resonates for me, like a tool that lots of different stakeholders can use to really, really practically understand the implications of the materials and the things they're using for waste management and recycling.
Yeah, I agree, because it's really critical for initiatives to be backed by solid data and analysis. So the research work that TCI does really contributes towards the overall body of knowledge on this topic area, which really goes a long way in helping stakeholders make more informed and advised decisions and direct their resources to better use. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I also really liked the evolution of what I thought was the 3 R's or the 4 R's, showing my age, obviously. But I think the way we've been able to take that framing and expand that to really encapsulate all of the different points within that system for plastics, where we can start making slight changes, and all the different people kind of responsible at different parts of that stage as well.
Yeah, it's really applicable until this day. You mentioned like a jingle in the 80s or 90s, but it's surprising how applicable and relevant that is still today, because we actually haven't progressed much, unfortunately. So yeah, it's a really good reminder to have, and thankfully there's a lot more thinking and a lot more awareness around that at the moment.
And I also, the other thing that stood out for me, and would love to know from you as well, but just this multi-stakeholder approach, the acknowledgement that this is a complex issue. Like you said, we're making slow progress, but the complexity really means that no one person, no one actor will ever be able to solve this thing alone. And I think Umesh's approach and TCI's approach to research is really acknowledging that complexity and saying we need to be working with these actors, the governments, the businesses, the consumers, and capturing all of those kind of insights for all those different relevant parties. I really think that resonates so strongly.
Yeah, you're right. TCI's work is really data-driven, but it actually also involves collaborative studies with local partners on the ground, like you mentioned. And they do this and generate findings through stakeholder and community interaction, which really adds a layer of depth, I think, to their work and makes it a lot more insightful and applicable. Like the example he gave of their work with Delterra, they actually went to the ground, interacted with community members. So that really helps add that layer of analysis to all their work. Yeah.
it's almost this beautiful mix of top down and bottom up, isn't it? Going and getting insights from the ground, but also using that macro view that I think they are quite privileged to have, working with government partners. So many things that they're able to bring from seeing that big picture as well as combining that with that really ground up data collection. So valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best way to move forward. Yeah.
So that's it for our first episode. Thank you so much for joining our inaugural podcast. We'll look forward to having you back here for episode 2. We'll be talking with SeedStars, a really great partner of ours across the region, about the challenges that environmental or climate-focused startups face as they try and grow and scale their solutions. And they're also going to give us an insight into some common mistakes that hopefully can be avoided by you all out there listening. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, and see you next time.
This has been Changing Tides with the Incubation Network. The hosts were Laura Benz and Titus Lowe. Follow the Incubation Network on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. For more episodes, visit the Incubation Network website or download them on your favorite podcast service. Copyright The Incubation Network and Second Muse.